social and emotional learning, creating culturally responsive, safe spaces virtually. My name is Alissa Farias, and I'm glad to share this time and space. So in our time and space together, we're going to discover ways to implement social emotional learning into virtual meetings through mindfulness, brain breaks, collaborative spaces, and unintentional moment creators, all wrapped around a culturally responsive lens. So one thing that I always ask for people when I talk about social emotional learning is for them to think about when they have felt the safest and most engaged in our current situation, I'm going to say in a virtual work setting. So think back to a professional development opportunity, a staff meeting, a grade level meeting, department meeting. When did you feel safe and when did you feel engaged? What were the things that you said to the neighbor next to you during it? That were complaints, concerns. What did you really like about it? What did you want to take back to your classroom? And I ask you to think that because similar mindset is the same way our students feel. And I think we can often lean into the fact that there are quality instructional practices out there that we're expected to do as educators with students. We don't always receive that when we're in meetings as educators. And to really reflect on what that means, to how valuable and important it is to always ask yourself, have I set this meeting up to be safe and engaged for all who are participating, including my students? And so when we talk about social and emotional learning, I kind of teeter-totter against these two concepts that are in front of you. Social emotional learning for me really is the first circle, and that is the Castle 5. Such as self-awareness, responsible decision-making. That's where we get social emotional learning from. Another component that people often associate to social and emotional learning is the whole child, which comes from C.R.E.D. That's the green image with the star in the middle and the person leaping. And so there we see healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. I combine challenge and engaged all of a sudden to create a new word. And what I want to talk about today is how we actually want to look at those two components together. Because when we view the academic side, the whole child, the challenged, engaged, supported, and the social emotional side, understand their emotions, manage emotions, establish and maintain positive relationships. When we intertwine that together, we get an incredibly strong academic environment. I often tell people you can't view social and emotional learning as this extra thing you do throughout the day. It really is just the base of the work that everything else is built off of. And it teams right up with the whole child and the academic work that you're doing. They're intertwined, it's together, it's the plate that everything else fits on. This image is great representation of the whole child and social emotional learning and how they come together. More than ever right now, because of the pandemic, we know that we need to lean into supporting social and emotional learning. Some might ask, but why? Why is this? Not just because we ourselves feel stressed, not just because we recognize in our students, but what's going on? This diagram really kind of helps describe the process we're in. Some people even equate it to something similar to grief and how we experience grief. So this figure right here represents reactions and behavioral symptoms in disasters. We can definitely say that the pandemic of COVID definitely feels like a disaster that's attacking our world. Back in the summer in Washington, research was showing that a lot of folks were leaving the honeymoon stage and arriving into disillusionment. Now that we're into November, much further along into the year, in November, December, reaching towards the end of the year in winter, we're seeing more folks close and living within the disillusionment. And it's going to be very hard to understand and to I think, be able to comprehend soon that in a few short months, we're going to have been in this pandemic for a year and what that's going to mean. And because we can see by this chart, this disillusionment stage and how long we live in it until we can begin to finally see that green light ahead of a vaccine, we're going to live there for a while. And it's so important then to recognize that we need to lean into social emotional learning, and especially one with the culturally responsive lens. Then we're really supporting our students, not just saying, I'm here to support you, emotions are high, we're stressed, this is a really hard time, but also doing so within a cultural lens. So let's look at what that means, the whole child SEL piece in relation to culturally responsive teaching. So I like to often use this framework called Motivational Framework. I have put the book that this comes from right there, the image, Excited to Learn, if you'd like to learn more about the Motivational Framework. But you see it right there in the circle. The Motivational Framework pretty much says if you're doing something such as, actually, let me jump to the next slide. If you're doing something like a self-assessment, being coached by a peer, assessing a lesson plan you've done to see how quality it is, maybe you're trying to really dive into all 4 ways to motivate somebody, you can use this framework to ask yourself, is what I'm doing, my lesson, my activity, my unit, really motivating kids to want to do it, to want to learn, to want to be engaged? And I know as an administrator and working with educators across the nation, I hear constantly kids are not wanting to learn. They're not wanting to show up. They're not wanting to turn their camera on. They turn on for half the day. They're not as motivated. So using a framework that's called Motivational Framework is an incredible way to ask ourselves, is what I'm doing actually motivational to my students? And there's 4 different categories: inclusion, attitude, competence, and meaning. So let's look at the top 2 in relation to our work that I'm going to show you today with culturally responsive teaching. So a question you might ask yourself, if you're saying, is my lesson inclusive? Is it showing respect and connectedness? You can ask yourself, how does the learning experience contribute to developing as a community of learners who feel respected and connected to one another? Or attitude, choice, and personal relevance. How does this learning experience offer meaningful choices and promote personal relevance to contribute to a positive attitude? Oftentimes when we build lessons, we say to ourselves, how is this lesson getting my student to that proficiency level I'm wanting to get them to? How is it getting my student to be able to show the cultural competence on a cultural aspect of the target language we're studying? Really, these questions get you to think in a different lens, a more motivational lens in the work you're doing. The nice thing is we can now take this motivational framework and attach it to culturally responsive teaching. And this is where I'm going to show you some activities to be able to reach this level of combining these 2 to really push our students forward. Some examples of inclusion: routines and rituals, respectful learning environment, students are comfortable, everyone's treated respectfully, lives and cultures are represented. When we think about attitude, ways we can do that is classes are taught with students' experiences, concerns, or interests in mind. Students make choices related to the learning that include experiences, needs, values, and strengths. Students are able to voice their opinion. When we're building lessons right now in this remote learning environment where we don't have kids directly in front of us to really monitor more of their work, there's a lot of asynchronous independent stuff going on. Using these concepts can really enhance a lesson and unit to really support the kids where they're at, the motivation and including the cultural piece. So let's look at some activities. Everything you're going to see here is yours. Sometimes there's even links on a page. That means you can go to get more of what you see on that page. You're going to get the PowerPoint. You're going to be able to jump right into this, use this right away in your classrooms. I'm about sharing and collaborating and giving you stuff so you can then have less on your plate. So mindfulness, let's look at some stuff you can do with your students. Think about this. When we sit down to do anything, before you sat down to this meeting, before you sit down to a staff meeting, before you arrive to a doctor's appointment, there's sometimes a lot of stuff that takes us to get there. And it's really important to acknowledge that. What did it take you to get here today? And asking your students that really acknowledges and respects their space, their environment, and their effort to get there, and respects the fact that they made it. Not that it's an obligation, a requirement that they're there, but you honor the fact that they made it and everything they had to do to get there. So you can ask the question and kids can share out. Top of the head, include times right at the beginning of class where kids can just talk. We have some students who are very verbal and they just need to talk and get something out before their mind can shift to the lesson at hand. So sometimes you can say, first 2 minutes of class, talk all you want to each other, chat in the chat box, you name it, we'll get started in 2 minutes. You can even do this as a brain break. It can be whatever they want to talk about. I think about in the classroom when kids walk in, they're talking about a million things to each other. And I, as a classroom teacher, would listen to everything they said when they walked in that door. If those were the things they wanted to talk about, if that was the one thing they couldn't wait to tell their neighbor, one, they're going to tell them, even if they're sitting down doing the bell work. Two, if that's what they want to talk about, I want to know. Because then I want to elicit that enthusiasm for whatever topic it is and bring it into the classroom in the target language. I want to know what I can do to get them motivated to use the target language. So consider an activity of top of the head. Spend 2 minutes, get to chat with your classmates you don't get to see very often. Listen, use what they talk about and pull it into the class. Really addressing the culture that they bring and what they want to talk about in the lesson ahead. Another thing I recommend is moving in and out. Ask yourself, do my students' emotions change from when they enter my class and when they exit? And when they exit, is it better or worse? Start tracking it. Start doing a class mood where you can start to say, on average, here is our mood, and you can begin talking about it. And getting the kids the opportunity to recognize their own emotions, but that you acknowledge their emotions and acknowledge how the learning environment makes them feel. I like using mood check-ins that are culturally different, such as the first image that represent different images. Be very careful with images like this, though I will say, make sure that whatever the different diversity of the faces are, the adjectives that describe those faces are not necessarily all negative towards a certain race. I also like the blue image because we know that emojis in cell phones started off as yellow. And there was some concerns and issues about that. What kind of skin color were these emojis representing? And over time, we've gotten more diverse in the emojis that we can use when we're texting with each other. I prefer not to use emojis that are yellow when I'm working with students. I prefer one that's skin color neutral, like this image right here. And mediation. So let's talk about mindfulness. Another activity you can do is do mindful minutes, where you spend the first minute, middle of the class, end of class, whatnot, just doing some kind of mindfulness activity. This will really help ground them, be aware of themselves so they're more aware of others around them. But what a great way to use the language. I can, on camera, walk students through different mindfulness activities where I'm pointing to my head, my nose, my mouth, as we work ourselves down the body, or we think about the different senses. And I'm touching my nose and saying the word in the target language. You do this enough, they're going to learn that vocab without you ever having to teach it. And you can build up. You can start the first day of class showing them the script as they watch you touch different parts of your body as you work through the mindful minute. And then you can slowly take the words away, you away. They don't see you anymore. They only hear you. You've now scaffolded vocab to them through a 1-minute activity each day. And now they have this vocab. And so there are several different mindful activities that I have for you, like this tense and release one. What a great way to teach adjectives they might never, ever have learned. And they're following along with you when they do the action for it. And movement with vocabulary intake increases the amount of vocab a student's going to have. One thing I like to do with mindful minutes is then get students to start creating their own, or pick one that they liked the most, and after like a month of me introducing them, then students can lead them. And you say each day now a student in the class is going to lead one of these. So now you're getting them to not only be exposed to the vocab, build their own, or do one that already exists, and now they're using the language to teach it out to their classmates. I also really like, when I think about mindfulness, giving students the opportunity to really ask themselves, how do I want to represent my work? What do I want to do? Really consider choice boards when we're working with students in remote learning. And it also really acknowledges the fact that some kids have technology, some don't. You can have a variety of options for them, tech ones, low tech. It can provide them some sense of control in a world that feels like there's no control. And also, it can give them the opportunity to show their voice, which is really important in culturally responsive teaching, giving the student the opportunity of voice to pick what might connect with them the most. And sometimes we give kids activities that are really from our perspective, our mindset. Like we understand them. We know what they are. I remember the first time a student was so confused about Spirit Week when we were talking about planning, like if you could plan the best Spirit Week, what would you plan? And the kid could not connect with the activity. And he's like, what do you mean spiritual, like God? And I couldn't figure out quite where we were miscommunicating on the language. He came from a country where at his schools, they didn't have Spirit Week. It was a completely different concept to him. But I thought to myself after the fact, if I had provided 3 prompts on that PowerPoint slide for the kids to think through, he could have picked the one that connected to him the most, not one that I knew for my own lens from the world that I live in. All right, let's go into brain breaks. A great social emotional thing, allowing kids to recognize it's okay to take breaks. Breaks are natural. You should take breaks. They help reset the mind back into learning, and they're a fun way to build culture and community. So you can do simple movement ones where you have the kids get up and do dance off. You can find videos of different culture dances and try to have the kids get up and mimic and follow the dance. You can have students do dances and the class follows them. You can even learn about these dances that you are then going to actually try to do with your students during class. And the nice thing about this is when we think about movement activities like this, let's say you're a Spanish teacher. You might think, I'm going to teach them the salsa. That'll be a fun one. And then every day we'll get up and we'll learn a step. And then the next day we'll add on another step. And the next day another step. And then each 2-minute brain break during class, by the end of the week, we've learned 6 different steps of the salsa. Consider bringing in dance moves of cultures, of languages that aren't connected to the language you teach also, but are students that are represented in your class. We use language to communicate the world that we know. And students could then readily have language to communicate to those around them a dance that they would have from their own culture. This is also a great one. Students find a version, it's something similar to TikTok. It's called Pass It. And if you click on the link in the video, in the PowerPoint there, you'll see what I mean. But it's like everyone picks something special to them and it looks like they're passing it through their screen to the next. But the other person now has an object that they picked and they look like they're passing it to the next person and they have an object they picked and so on. And just imagine like a Teams or a Zoom meeting where you have a bunch of squares together and it looks like you're passing from one to the next. It's a fun activity. You can do it during the brain break, pick an object to bring it back. And next thing you know, you have this really awesome activity build up where kids can use the target language to talk about their object. How many people had similar objects? What objects did you not expect somebody to bring? And a fun brain break activity now becomes a conversational activity in the classroom. Does not belong. Here's another fun activity. Tell kids, go during break and put something around you that wasn't there previously and it doesn't belong in the space you're in. And then we have to guess what the does not belong object is. And it becomes a fun get out of your seat brain break activity that then can also bring in the target language for growth and builds community, allows kids to have choice. Perhaps kids bring something in that's culturally representative to something for them. And the student's like, well, what is that? I've never seen that before. And then all of a sudden you open up a door to a conversation that's culturally connected. Other brain breaks you can say is listen to a song on your break and share the song with your small group. Have a student share out a talent during a brain break, such as tell an appropriate joke or play an instrument. Enjoy just a minute of quiet and reflect back what that felt like. Insist that they must go to another room and grab something and bring it back to the class, to their learning environment to share out to the group. You name it. Multiple ways to get kids up and moving, to have a break, and then incorporate it into the class. So they're having voice, they're having culture, they're representing who they are in the lesson. But then you can also use it to build up the target language. Collaborative spaces. I have several things to share with you here. First off, consider fun images like this. Research actually shows that if we show images of cute animals and babies and whatnot, it actually and improves our emotional state because it puts us at a sense of like, ah. And so you can use images like this to actually help kids feel more emotionally stable. And then it's a fun icebreaker activity of how you feel today. Sometimes I like to use these images then to say, Johnny, you said you feel like you're 5 today. Guys, let's pick number 5 as our image today. And I ask you all, what do you think happened right before that picture was taken? Or what do you think happened right after that picture was taken? Now you've built this collaborative space that now pulls in the target language. Another one as an example for you guys. I love using spaces like this. Mentimeter is amazing for pulling in student voice, making sure that everyone is represented in the classroom and it's visual. And you can students do not need to log in with a email and password to get into this. You just provide them a code, boom, they're in, and they can access it on their cell phone. These are different images of what Menti looks like. Padlet is also another favorite of mine. Students do not need to log in. You can create a free account and you can have up to 8 free Padlet boards. Great way to build collaboration synchronously or asynchronously. Let me give you an example. This is an image that I put on a Padlet. You can see the link there to the Padlet. And I simply said to students, describe this image with one word. They go to the Padlet, I share the Padlet on my screen, and we get to see the words popping up one after another. I then said, now go and write a sentence describing that picture using the words on the screen. But I want us to have every student with last name A through M describe it from the cheetah's perspective. Every student what did I say? Like what's next? N through Z from the deer's perspective. You can do this from the person taking the picture. You could do this from the perspective of the mom of the deer. What's her perspective on her deer baby? Cuddling up to I think that's a cheetah or a leopard. We're going to roll with it. And now we're teaching kids different perspectives, which really leans into cultural respectfulness to those around us through one simple image and building up their target language skills in a collaborative online space. Here's different ways that you can get student voices. You can find these different things online for free in a Teams meeting. You can do polls in Zoom meetings. They're accessible in pretty much every video format we're using for online learning. Collaborative spaces, other ways you can do this is Flipgrid, pushing kids into channels and breakout rooms, using the discussion board in Schoology, or just having kids all type into one shared doc. One lesson I've learned when I have anyone use a shared document and I'm asking them all to answer a prompt, is I like to designate each row for a student. So they have a specific row to type in and they don't end up typing over anybody else and we don't have any conflicts on the page. I also love this one. We did this one in an activity here in Tacoma where we on a Padlet all talked about how we are proud of something in our city. Consider activities like this that build the community to talk about why are we proud within this classroom, within this school? What's happened recently in our community that makes you proud? What makes you proud to be learning a different language, whatnot? But it builds this sense of collegiality and collaboration and community when you use words like proud to really bring people together. I provided some other collaborative spaces for you guys. Structure like this is really nice because not only does it help kids articulate what they want to say when you ask them for a reflection, but it builds collaborative space because everyone responds in a very similar format. So it's easy to read everyone's responses and it pulls kids into reflecting a little deeper instead of just saying like at the dinner table, how was your day today? Good. Did you do anything fun? Yes. When you provide protocols to really get kids to reflect on something, you get more out of them. And then it's nice to share responses collectively in whole class, small group, whatnot. What was similar? What was different? What do you notice that are common themes in our reflective responses to these protocols? I'm going to show you guys a few more that you can use. This is a great one. Saying something today connected with me, resonated with me, that I heard somebody say, saw somebody do, an image somebody picked, and then you're building this connectedness by saying what another classmate did that resonated with you. One word is a great way to end a lesson, to summarize something, and I often like to use menti.com because it builds a wordle for you. And that's usually how I show it on the PowerPoint, is I tell them where to go and what code to use. Here's another great protocol that you can use. Here's what, so what, now what. I also like to use cultural images like this, authentic material when I'm teaching. And I'll tell you something else I really began doing is I taught Spanish. So I'd only use Spanish images. But that didn't really represent my students. Just because I'm teaching Spanish doesn't mean I only have to use Spanish-related images to teach my students. So I began pulling in images from other countries that represented students in my classroom to then do things like circumlocution, describe an image there, list down all the actions you see, list all the colors you see, list all of the adjectives you see, and we begin to build this word wall to describe this image. Asking questions, what do you think is happening? What do you think is about to happen? Do you think they're going to eat that food? And then we begin to tell a story about this image together and using so much target language, their curiosity as we try to figure out what this image is about. And then I tell them the story behind the image and get them to then say, do we have something similar to this in our culture? I don't have to use Spanish-specific images, stories, products, practices, whatnot, to necessarily teach the language. If I know it's going to engage my students, I'm going to use it, and then I'm much more culturally responsive. And there's some other images here that you could use that to kind of represent the work we've done, like providing samples. A lot of schools have students who does this dance. I don't want to pronounce it wrong. I believe it's the haka. I apologize if I said that wrong. And talking about the dance and the spirit and the meaning behind the dance will intrigue kids, especially if you have students who do this at football games and sports events and assemblies. They're going to be engaged in wanting to talk about it, which is going to get them to use the target language and build a more culturally responsive classroom. Some more images as ideas. Unintentional moment creators. We're going to wrap up with this one. When we're in the classroom, we build moments that are unintentionally there that build community. I call them unintentional moment creators. It's like someone saying to a kid, hey, I like your new shoes. Where'd you get them? A connection has been created that was unintentional in that moment. Or when someone walks in with food, hey, can I get some of that? A moment has been created that was unintentional. We can't build that in remote learning. We cannot have that every single time kids log in, the only thing they do is learn, get taught at, like a sit and get, and then push back to asynchronous. We have to have opportunities to build community. Get kids to talk to each other, even though they're on the screen next to each other. Make sure they talk, make sure they get to know each other, and use these kind of prompts I'm going to give you to build those. Table topics are great. Pick questions that get kids to get to know each other, talk to each other a little bit more. I really like to use these kind of questions to maybe start off the class and then push them into small groups to discuss further. I have no doubt that a whole class size, kids start turning their cameras off, kids are a little more silent. I could pick sticks, but the flow isn't as fast. I like to more often push kids into breakout groups of 4 to 6, and then say, when you come back, I'm going to pick one from your group to randomly share out what you talked about. So then there's this concept that, ooh, who is she going to pick? And we all have to make sure we do the activity. So if she does call on us, we're ready to share out, and they get to know each other. So I'm going to just give you a whole bunch of different unintentional moment creators that you can use with students. Another type of connector questions we like to use that can build community and also respect the social emotional side of our students. Like, what makes you go, ah? What's one thing you're looking forward to? These are 8 questions from Harvard that they say will turn strangers into friends. Link is there to read more about these 8 questions. awesome ones that you can pull in. And my God, do these questions build into bigger moments of being able to use the target language. They become hooks for what you can do next in that lesson. Questions you can ask instead of how are you? We want to be there for our kids and their social emotional needs, but we need questions that'll get them to use more bigger response to then build up the target language. This is me. I love this activity. Everyone turns their camera off. You say a phrase like pineapple on my pizza. I love it. Everyone who also likes it has to turn their camera on. And then you get to see who else likes the same thing as you. Cameras off, say another phrase. Those who agree with it, turn their cameras on. And this activity is really fun to then get kids to start saying their own phrases, where this is something true about me. Who else is this true for? And kids turn their cameras on and they get to see, wow, similarities, commonalities, you name it. Would you rather? Fun activity to then get kids talking about food and where's your favorite pizza place? And if you could choose pasta or pizza, what kind of pizza? A bunch of would you rathers. To not only build community with this, consider images like this that bring in culture, where they're opposites within cultures, such as conchas and donuts, how one might be seen as like the Mexican donut and then a regular donut, and comparing those two and this or that and talking through it. Which hot sauce, which is the more popular side dish, this or that, for your preference, French fries or rice. And then you bring in a cultural aspect that also helps build this unintentional moment creators. Excuse me. Shared truth is another awesome activity to build culture and moments that where you get to connect. And routines. We talked about this a little bit in the beginning. Routines are really important and they're really culturally sensitive to kids who all come from different routines, different structures, different backgrounds. If they can jump into a class and know that their structure, routine, they can follow something that might not be the norm for them of how our classroom runs. But if it begins to become a routine and norm, and that's what they can expect in class, they can begin to flow with it, and it makes them feel safer in the classroom to have these routines. Other things that are really important in routines is not just what you do now, then we're gonna, I do, you do, we do, not those kind of routines necessarily, but norms and private reasoning time and collaboration time and exit slip. Things that not only provide structure for the lesson, but structure for communicating, sharing, recognizing that some people might need private reasoning time. And we're going to do that as a class, 30 seconds. It feels awkward on a remote learning Teams meeting, 30 seconds of silence, but we're going to do it before we get to collaboration time. Thank you guys so much for sharing this time and space with me. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all the work you're doing. And as we continue together to build classrooms that are culturally responsive and safe for our students.